Hello everybody. This is a lecture that will combine several program examples which goes over repetition structures that we can use in Java. So on your screen you are looking at an empty JGrasp editor, and I'm going to bring in some of the individual programs and go over them with you in this lecture. So let me grab my what you see on your screen is a very simple class called test, and in here I am showing you one form of repetition structure that I can write with my while statement. So I start my main method. This is where I define a variable and I call it x and assign a value, and then I write my while method, and the first thing I do is write a condition. Remember, I do not put in a semicolon at the end of the while statement because that is going to end the statement. What we are trying to do here is make sure that the condition evaluates to be either true or false, and in this case x is assigned the value 10, so the condition is true, 10 is less than 20. And then I'm going to go into my next line, and let me go back and show the line numbers. So I'm going to go to line number 9, where I am going to use the system out print statement to print out the value of x. The next line is very important, which is part of the looping structure, where I am incrementing my value, and then line number 11 is only going to add a line break to it. So if I now at this point run this program, so let me go file, save as, and I hope I do not have anything. Let's see, fall 13 and 2800 and Java. So I don't think I have anything called test, so I'm just going to go ahead and save the file and then compile it, and at this point it compiles fine, and if I run it then I'm going to see these values come up, which is going to print starting from 10 all the way up to 20. So of course you will only go up till 19 because this condition just says it is comparing within less than 20. So as soon as it becomes 20, it cannot run anymore. Okay, now let me do the same exact thing, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the same program and write the same program, and I'm going to comment this one out, but write using a do while loop. Okay, so comment this one out. There we go. So now I have the same thing. I have a public class test, and I have written it where I have a do statement. So even if I had defined this value as 10, if I would have gone ahead and changed this value to 20 or maybe 21, I would execute the code between line 24 and line 26 at least once before I would check my while condition. So in this case, as you saw, this is my result from my previous one. I'm going to get the very same result. So if I go ahead and compile it, and then I'm going to run it, and I get the very same result, which says value x, and starting with 10 and going all the way up to 19. However, in this case the only difference is if I change this value to let's 20, it is still going to be getting executed at least once. So if I compile it now, and then if I run this, it says value of x is 20 because this code between 24 and 26 gets executed first, and then I check my condition, and of course at this point my condition is false, though I cannot repeat it anymore. So even if I change this one to 30, it is still going to run once because it is running the do part of it, but then failing the condition over here. Okay, now I'm going to use the same thing and basically the same program and write it utilizing a for loop. So let me bring this in, and I have done the same exact thing, but I have written a for loop. In my for loop I have initialized my counter, or initialized x as an integer starting with x, and then my condition is 20, and then this is where I'm incrementing it, and then I am writing my two system out prints and having it print the line, and of course the /n is going to take it to the next line. I could have easily put a print line over here, and that way I did not have to write my my line on line number 38. But let's go ahead and run it, and just to show you that it would work exactly the same way, starting with 10 all the way up to 19. So same exact thing that I did with 3 different forms, with just while, and then the do while, and then the for loop. Okay. Before we exit out of here, I want to run 2 small ones, and I am going to copy this, and you'll see what I'm trying to do over here. Let me take this part out, put it over here, and then I have a public class test, and then I'm going to have this line over here. However, this one needs to open and close over here, and then I write my public static. Let me move this. This is just the indentation to make sure that I am following everything. Okay. So as you can see over here, this is the beginning of my test. This is the beginning of the class. Then I have a beginning of my string over here, the main method, and I need to close that main method over here. So I can bring it over here, and then maybe move this over here, and then match this one over here. So I hope you all understood what I just did. I basically gave them some indentation for me to understand, or to make it easy to read, and let's see what works over here now. So let me go over the codes with you guys for just a minute. What I have over here is a for statement, and within my for statement I of course start with 1, go all the way up to 10, and this is my incrementer. But inside my for, I am trying to write my value of a with a space. So that is what I'm going to do. However, on line 53, when it keeps on going through the loops and starting with 1 all the way up to 5, but when it becomes 5, that's when it catches this condition right here. So I have a for loop, and inside my for loop I have a condition where if my value of a becomes equal to 5, I would break out of the loop and basically come out of this for loop over here and catch this statement which says system out print you have exited the loop. Okay, so let me run this, and let me show you what this is going to produce. So here it is. Of course, starting with 1, you print 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. As soon as you hit 5, you catch, or you hit the break statement, which takes you out of the loop. So there is nothing afterwards. So that's why you have exited the loop, and that is the end of my program. Now, let me do the same thing, but I'm going to do it a little differently. And this is what I'm going to do. And this time I'm going to extend this one, bring it over here, and then bring these 2 statements right here. So now I have give me just a minute. Let me indent it to make sure that I have opened and closed everything. So I have a public class test, and this is the end of my test. I need to begin one over here. That's my string, and that needs to end over here. But then I have a for statement, and I need one to break it out or close that too. So I have a test beginning over here, ending over here. I have a string that starts over here, ends in here. I have a for statement that starts over here and ends over here. So then that accounts for all my three opening and closing. All right. So now what I have is, instead of a break, I have a continue, and let's see what that would do for us. Okay. So this is what happens over here. So I start with a equals 1, and my loop is, and my condition is 1 less than 10, and the condition is true. And I come to this next line, which is line number 70. At this point, a is only equal to 1, so it does not even go inside this loop right here. It just says system out print line a equals 1, and then you have a space, so that's why you have a space in here. So the same thing happens where it goes over here, increments my 1 to 2. At this point, I'm again going to come in, check this condition. This condition is not true, so I'm going to go ahead and print a again. Now it's going to be 2. So then I continue from 1, 2, 3, 4, but look what happens when I come to 5. As soon as I come to 5, what continue does is basically skip that statement. So then it actually lets me go back and go to incrementing my a to a plus. So what my continue does is let me skip this statement, and then, but it is still within my for loop, so it basically takes me back to my increment. So at this point, 1 is added to 5, it becomes 6. Again, 6 is less than 10. This is not true at that point, and I'm going to print a over here, which is a equals 6. So that's why I go from 1 all the way to 9, but I skip the 5 in between with this statement continue. So this is how you can come out of the loop if I encounter, or if I need to come out from that, if I need to continue skipping a particular number here. So that's the use of continue statement. I still am within the loop, but with the continue, I'm just skipping one particular digit between 1 through 9. All right. So these are just small set of examples that you would see in the loop. What I want to do next is to write another code which actually comes from the book, which is one of the examples. So let me go and say new, and at this point I'm going to bring in this file, which is this file right here. Now this is the file, and this is actually the program, and let me read that program real quick with you all. Basically what it is this is a program where you're asked to write an interactive program where you input the name of the salespeople, and then depending upon the number of cars that the person had sold, you are going to create a bar graph to show how many cars are being sold. And we are going to use a looping statement to do the bar graph. Okay, so let's go through the program. Let me open up my line numbers over here. So the first thing I do is I have a scanner. I import it because I'm going to take some values in, but as soon as I use my scanner, I have to use this statement over here to instantiate this object called input, which is of the scanner type. The next thing I do is define some integer values. Now make a note of the fact that I have not defined any of these things as private because I have not defined this program as a class and instantiate any object. This is all by itself one program which has a main method and it has some variables that are defined, and I'm going to basically take the values in and process that information. So I defined several set of variables over here, or identifiers, where I'm going to store some of the values, and I am taking in the values by writing my system.out.print and using my scanner statement. So it's my input object, which is of the type scanner, and I'm using the next int to take the value in and store it in PAM cells. Now this is important, that if you are trying to take in a value, you need to use the correct method that would accept that value and keep the data format of that value intact. So in this case, I am taking the value as an integer, and that's why I'm storing it in PAM cells, which is also a memory location or an identifier which would hold an integer value. I do the same thing with the next 3 or 4, 5 statements. So all the way from 11 up to 19, I'm basically taking the values in, first of all asking a question and taking the values in by this method called input.nextIn and storing it in the appropriate variables. Then on from line 20 until line 23, only thing I'm doing is calling this method called drawGraph, and the drawGraph is taking 2 arguments. The first one is a string and the second one is an integer. All right, so as you can see, this method is now been defined right over here, and look at this method. It's a very simple method that I define. First of all, the name of the method is drawGraph, and I'm calling the same method, and this particular method would take in 2 arguments, which are given by string, the variable name, and integer, the variable sales. Inside that, what I'm doing is I'm printing out the name that I input. So if I input Pam, Rodella, Jill, William, whatever I input, I'm going to system out print line and export or show the name over here. But then with that sales value that I have, I'm going to write a for loop and create this graph with this symbol, which is X. So if I input let's say a value 20, then I will start with my integer X, which is set at 0. X is less than 20 over here, and then as long as the value is the condition is valid, I'm going to go ahead and print an X over here, and then I'm going to go system out print line. So by doing that, I keep on printing my X continuously. So remember, this is my print, so I'm not leaving, I'm still coming back and printing everything in the same line. All right, so let me go ahead and save the file, save as, and let me go to 2800 Java. Save. So once I compile and let me run it, so at this point it says entered the car sold by Pam, and I say 84, enter, and I'm going to accept everything, 54, 478, and let's say 29. All right, so these are my values. So with these values, what I'm doing is I'm saying Pam has sold 84 cars. So this is my graph that I create out with this particular for loop right here. Okay, very, very simple. I'm just going through and printing these things out. Now, one thing I want to warn you over here is what I really should do, it's a good programming practice to do, is do something like this over here. Okay, because what we are doing here is, let me show you, So let me input some more values: 89, 28, 54, and 74. Okay. What I'm doing here is, with the for statement, the very first statement is the one that gets executed. Without this curly bracket, it almost seemed like after this particular line, I'm going to come to this line, which is not the case, because the for is associated with the line that is immediately afterwards. So by not having this curly bracket, sometimes it gives you a feeling that it should be going to the next line, which it is really not, because it is only associated with one line. Okay, so it's a good programming practice to put the curly brackets after the for to designate the body of for. Okay, so as long as this condition is not met, it keeps on printing X and going back and incrementing it. And as soon as this condition is met, that's when I come out and go to my print line, which takes me to the next line. Okay, now again, what my next line does is basically, then it goes to Leo's case, and for Leo I have to print the same thing over again, but it starts from the next line. So that's how I take those values in and prints those X's out. So as long as I'm in the same person, I would complete out printing the graph before I can move out and go to the next person. All right. So that takes care of this particular program. Now let me show you another program. And let me go File, New. Okay. And let me bring this particular program. And this is again another example that I have used, and I try to write the program at the top. Basically what this one is doing is, this is again a program that is writing a class, and inside this class I have some private data members, and I have some set get methods, and also another method that is going to display. Now this is something that you had also seen in my previous lecture, so let me go through it. But before we start it, look at what I'm trying to write. So this particular program is trying to write an application which is it's a purchase that contains an invoice number, the amount of sale, the amount of sales tax. We need to include the set methods for the invoice number and the sale amount. Within the set method for the sale amount, we need to calculate some sales tax at 5% of the sale amount, and also we need to include a display method that would display some of the purchase details. So let me show the line numbers here. So at this point I have private method, which is int, another private method double, and these are my identifiers, and then I have a tax rate. This is defined as a static final, and my rate is defined as 5%. The first method is my set invoice number. My set invoice number would take an argument of integer type, and it is public, but it does not return anything. That is why it is void. And I take this value num and set it as my invoice number. Same thing with my sale amount. I take the amount that I'm taking in and put it in my sale amount, and this is where I'm also calculating my tax, because I need to calculate the tax upon on the sale amount. And then I have a display, which basically shows the display of the invoice number, the sale amount, and the tax. So, okay, so over here I have the sale amount, and then I also have the tax, right? So now let me bring in another program which is going to be my testing the purchase. So at this point, let me go File, Save As, and it needs to go to the correct folder, save, and I can compile the file. And of course, since there is no main method, it is going to compile fine. But let me go ahead and open another one and bring this program over here. And this one is basically an application that would declare some purchase objects, and then will ask the user to input some purchase details, and depending upon the prompted values, we will let them, it will come back and process that information. But while we are processing, there are some conditions that we have put in, that the user should be putting a number between 1,000 and 8,000. When you prompt from a sale amount, do not proceed until the user has entered a non-negative value, which means when the program asks you to input a value, you cannot use a negative value. Now over here, I'm using this swing because I am going to use the J option pane, which is going to bring in my message boxes. Let me go back and show the line numbers. So this is what this one is doing. Then I have a create purchase, and then I have a main method. Inside my main method, I define some variables. Purchase purge. Remember, this is my object that is of the type purchase. So this is the class that I just defined over here. Okay, so this particular class has these individual data members. Some of them are private, and then it also has some public methods that I can use to set these values in. And then I also have a public method that would calculate the sale amount, and then I have a display method that I can associate with that object that I just created, which would access these individual methods to reach to these values and do the processing. So coming back over here, I have purch, P-U-R-C-H, that's my object, and then I have these individual data variables, int num, double amount, string entry. And now look what I did with this over here. Now these are two values that are given as a condition that people need to be inputting the value between 1,000 and 8,000, cannot go less than that or cannot go more than that. Since I'm using the swing package over here, I can bring in my show input dialog box with my J option pane. Of course, two arguments, null makes it come in the middle, and this is my question that I'm going to ask. Remember, when I'm taking the value in through J option pane, the value is coming in, or I'm capturing the value as a string, so that's how I'm storing the value in entry. But then by using this integer.parseInt, I am converting that string value into an integer value and storing it in this variable or identifier called num. Okay, with that value that I store, now I write a while statement, and the while statement checks to see if the value is within this range. And look at the range, it cannot be less than equals low or number greater than equals high. So it has to satisfy one of these condition. Okay, so that's why I have an or over here, and then I ask them to input the invoice number, and I do it by again saying J option pane, show input dialog box. So when I bring the dialog box, I tell them that invoice number that they need to input should be between 1,000 and 8,000. Okay, of course, once I take that value in, again as a string, I need to convert it with using my parseInt and store it in num. Okay, the next thing I do is ask for inputting the sale amount, and this is where I store my sale amount. And of course, with a parse double method, I'm going to convert that value, that string value, into a double value and store it in this identifier, which allows to store only double values. Now once I get that double value over here, next line I'm going to do a while statement which checks that non-negative part of it. This is where I check to see if the value that a person had or the user had inputted is less than 0 or not. If it is, if the condition is true, then it says enter a sale amount again, because remember, non-negative numbers are not allowed. So then I'm going to take that value in, again convert it with the parse double method and store it in my amount. The next thing I do is I would associate that particular object and call this set invoice number. And remember, my set invoice number is going to take in a value over here, which is the num, and then also ask you for the sale amount, which is the amount that I want to pass. So once I take these two values, I'm going to use these two methods to set those two values inside my class, and then I'm going to call the display method to show me the value. Okay, so now let's go ahead and save this file, save as, and oops, sorry. So this is where I'm going to save this particular program. Again, let me compile it. And I had compiled it before, so I know it is going to work. So now it's going to come in and ask me to enter my invoice number. Remember, it has to be something between the low and the high. So let's say I input something like 84. Look what happens. As soon as I hit 84, it comes back and says the invoice number must be between 1,000 and 8,000. So this value that I am taking in with my while condition, I'm checking that value. Let's say I put in 697 now. Let's see what happens. If I do okay, again it comes back, it says nope, you cannot come out because while this condition is less than low and greater than high, as long as one of these conditions are met, this is going to continue coming back to you. All right, so you have to input a number like 2859. Now this is going to be taking that value and also coming out of the loop. So if I say okay, now it goes to the next one. It says enter sale amount. Now over here again, if I input -9, remember I cannot come out because I'm going to go or get caught with this while amount here. So it's going to come back and say enter sale amount again. So let's say at this point I say my value is 9287. As soon as I say okay, now it is actually transferring back to the console at this point. So then it says invoice 2859, amount of sale is 9287, tax is 464.35. So I'm calculating, or I'm showing the individual values that are associated by using the right methods, which is my display method, purge.display. So showing my invoice number, amount of sale, and my tax amount. So with these examples that I had gone over, I think I have covered most of the materials that you will see in this chapter. Thank you.